Joining me now is somebody who's been at the tip of the spear following the Russia hoax, the Obamagate, problems all from the beginning. This latest indictment against President Trump may be a point of no return for the Republic, and I can't think of anybody better to ask other than the great one, Mark Levin. Happened to be having dinner with the president moments after the indictment was announced last week. Mark, thank you, sir. How are you?
Glenn, how are you, my friend? I think we need to call me the great big one now. I'm about 25 pounds overweight. But anyway,
only 25. I'm about 60. So anyway. So, Mark, first of all, let's start with the dinner. How did that go? What was his mood? What was he thinking?
Well, I interviewed him for a couple hours for the Fox show, and he asked me to stay for dinner, which would be in a few hours. I said, great. So I took off to take a drive. About a half hour later, I hear that he's going to be indicted. And I called back to Mar-a-Lago to his people, and I say, you sure you want me to come back? He said, no, he wants you to come back. And it was an honor. I sat at the table with him and the First Lady and a couple other people there. And he's remarkable. I wouldn't be able to eat. Would you, Glenn? He was eating. He was pleasant. He's a tremendous host, as you no doubt know. He said, "You believe this stuff?" I said, "I don't." And it was just weird because he was like a normal guy, as pleasant as could be, as nice as could be, but you could also see he just would shake his head about how ridiculous this whole thing. And by weird, I don't mean him. I mean, what's happening is just so bizarre.
It is.
And, so he was great.
I've said for years that there's going to come a time when you don't recognize your country. And I think that happened last year. And last year I said, no, it's going to be as different in a year from now. And here we are. And Mark, I think we're a banana republic.
We're in a tyranny. It's just a question of what degree of tyranny now. And we have to try and claw our way back. I used to talk about us at the precipice looking into the abyss. We're in the abyss.
Yeah.
And the question is whether we can claw our way out. They crossed the ideological Rubicon in the indictment of Trump. It's a non-case. I mean, I don't think people want to keep hearing about the case. There is no case. There is no law. There is no justification for any of this. Or, by the way, Atlanta or Washington either, as far as I'm concerned. These are all preposterous attempts to go after him over documents and things of that sort.
Let me play something. I had Alan Dershowitz on today on radio, and it was a little unsettling. Listen to what he told me.
Well, this case will be won, but not immediately. There's a possibility they could make a change of venue motion. It will be denied, and that could be appealed, or the statute of limitations. But otherwise, it will have to run its course, and that will be, 2 appeals, et cetera, and that will take us through the election. I think there'll be a conviction in this case if it's tried in New York in front of a New York jury.
Wow. Holy cow. He said he thinks there'll be, not based on the facts, but just based on the fact that it is happening in Manhattan. And as he said, who wants to walk around in Manhattan and be one of the jurors that just let Donald Trump go? He is enemy number 1 in Manhattan. That's stunning.
Well, if there is a trial, this is why the prosecutor threw 34 charges against the wall, hoping he can grab just one of the 34, even though they're piled on charges. Now, that said, the reason you get to file motions is because they're going to be challenging the sufficiency of these charges and the sufficiency of the evidence right up front. So it depends what this judge does or some future judge does. So before we get to a trial, there's all these motion hearings that will take place. He wants the defense to get all their motions in by August. He wants the government to respond, I think it was by September 9th or 19th. He will make his rulings after that. I just don't trust this guy. His daughter worked for Kamala Harris. He works for a number of Democrats.
There is no way in the America that I understand that this guy doesn't recuse himself. I mean, how can you possibly be given to act blue? and to another pact to stop Trump, and then have your daughter do what she does. And you don't recuse yourself? You think you can be impartial? I don't even understand that.
As a matter of fact, under the New York rules of professional conduct for attorneys, and by the way, this is in every state, and it's also with the ABA rules nationally, if there's an appearance of a conflict, you're to recuse yourself. Well, by God, there's clearly an appearance of a conflict, and he should recuse himself. In fact, he should be recusing himself. This prosecutor who ran on prosecuting another person, he should be disbarred. But what's the problem? The problem is the Bar Association and the courts in New York are all Democrat, all left wing. This is what happens when you have one party rule. And that's what the Democrats are trying to do nationally by taking the voting system in California and imposing it on us, by having the borders open. So people coming across of bad will and goodwill have absolutely no attachment to our history or our Constitution, many of whom are illiterate in their own language. We can talk about separation of powers and things all we want. They don't know what the hell we're talking about. That's why a lot of these cities are allowing illegal aliens to vote and taking away voter ID so they can wind up voting in federal elections, and we wouldn't have any way to deal with it. The Democrat Party is corrupt. The Democrat Party is totalitarian, and they are dragging this country over the cliff. It's that simple. It's that sad.
I will tell you that it makes me very nervous. One story that probably hasn't gotten any attention today that came out about 11 o'clock today was Jamie Dimon from, who's he with, Citigroup, and or JP Morgan, and he came out and he said, we probably need to do some sort of eminent domain to take farmland to be able to build windmills and solar panels all across the country. You're now talking about seizing people's property for green energy? I mean, I just don't know how much longer before people really wake up to where we are. We are in a very scary place.
Climate change, it really started in the 1970s, as you know, in Europe. It's the degrowth movement of the radical left.
From the 1960s.
They dress it up as climate change. And notice, it's an attack on private property rights. It's an attack on capitalism. It's an attack on commerce, wealth creation, prosperity.
Individual rights.
The whole thing. And Jamie Dimon, probably they're upset with him today for opening his mouth. But the truth is, how many propellers can you have? You know, you're going to have to take a lot of land in order to have propellers, aren't you? But it's even more than that. We're not going to have fossil fuels. We're not going to have gas-driven cars. In addition to this, you have HUD changing zoning laws for all of our communities. So we're all going to be packed in tighter and tighter spaces, having to take public transportation. I'm telling you, this is where I wrote about. This is American Marxism. That's exactly what's taking place here. And the reason they want to take out Trump, to be perfectly honest with you, is he's a historic figure. And he fights them. He takes them on. He's not Chris Christie or Larry Hogan or these other fools.
And he's not just American and an icon. He's an icon of capitalism and the individual. And now he has become this symbol of everything. I mean, this is the way I look at him. I look at him and I shake my head every time. I'm like, what? How is this guy still standing? This guy just is getting arrow after arrow after arrow, and it's not because of him. It's because of us. They've got to take him out to be able to get to the rest of the country.
That is 100% correct. And you asked me about that dinner, and I marveled how strong this man is. He doesn't need any of this. He didn't have to get involved in any of this. He's a multi-billionaire. He has a wonderful life. But the more they push him, the more he pushes back. And this is what they hate. They figured by now that he would collapse. Nixon collapsed. Others collapsed. This guy will not collapse. He stands up to these prosecutors. He stands up to the media. He stands up to the establishment. He comes by his conservatism, not by philosophy, but by common sense. He's sort of a common sense guy who has seen more and more and more. both in his business life and now in his political life, that conservatism, that liberty, that individualism, that the Constitution, that they're right, that they protect you. And if you're not going to embrace them at a time like this, well, then when are you going to embrace them?
Okay,
These are the principles we need.
So I was with some politicians last night who shall remain unnamed, and
Tell us.
They brought up a possibility, and I want to run it by you and get your advice, because I'll support whoever the candidate is. If it's Donald Trump, if it's Pinocchio, at least I'll watch his nose and I'll be able to know when he's lying. I don't care who the person is. I just don't want Gavin. I don't want Kamala. None of the Marxists. None of the Marxists. So how do we get there? And I want to ask you that. Let me take you to the election. Alan Dershowitz said something, and it was very much what I heard from a couple of guys last night that are in Washington. And they both made it very clear. They'll absolutely support whoever it is. Donald Trump, Mickey Mouse, doesn't matter. We've got to stay together as a party. But they said this will go all the way through the election, most likely, unless it's dismissed. And then there's 4 others. And so this election period, and I think this is what they're doing, they're making this, again, the media will make this all about Donald Trump and all about he's a liar. And back and forth, we'll be arguing he's a liar, he's not. In the meantime, we won't be talking about possible war. We won't talk about possible financial collapse. We won't talk about getting our superpower back. We won't talk about, China. We won't be talking about anything other than Donald Trump. If I'm Donald Trump, I don't quit. I mean, if I'm him, I never stop. But I also, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, I also think, is there a way that I can play kingmaker and not be the distraction? Can I still do something and not be the distraction? Or is the distraction just the distraction, Mark?
The other day, Glenn, they started on DeSantis. They started calling DeSantis an anti-Semite on MSNBC. Yeah. And on the other networks, this is a guy that's been more pro-Israel than anybody I can think of, other than Trump. And he has a huge following of Orthodox Jews all over the country, including in Florida. And they called him an anti-Semite because he dared to challenge George Soros. The problem we have in this country is we have an American Pravda that is so thoroughly corrupt. And yet this platform's created, there's other alternatives that are created, but they still have the biggest platform. Yeah. And this drumbeat day in and day out, whether it's been fascistic societies or Marxist societies, to control the speech, to control the language, to control the narrative day in and day out, day in and day out, day in and day out, is a problem that we've yet to figure out. These people use liberty to destroy liberty, and they use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. Now, having said that, there are certain things we can do. Our billionaires need to step up like Soros does. Amen. And they need to put their money where their mouths are. They're going to cease to exist themselves. Right. Our district attorneys and our attorneys general in the states, they need to step up. They need to scour their law books, and they need to sue these bastards in every way they possibly can, just like they do to us. So it's not that we can stop the left and the Democrat Party from doing what they're doing. We need to start doing what they're doing. Yes. Okay, so let me ask you 2 questions. And I have an example of one that worked, by the way. Go ahead. The independent counsel statute was in existence. It was passed during the Carter administration. It was written by Barney Frank and Christopher Dodd, and it was unleashed against Ronald Reagan with Iran-Contra, and then it was unleashed more against George H.W. Bush, and then it was unleashed against Bill Clinton by Janet Reno, of all people. Mm-hmm. And you had Ken Starr, and you had Robert Ray and others. And so the Democrats and the Republicans on Capitol Hill said, let this law lapse because we're getting killed by it. And they let it lapse. The problem is when you have Mitch McConnell and guys like that who are not really up for the fight or in for the fight, or when you have blowhards like Chris Christie going on TV attacking our guys, and that's how he gets his pay at ABC News, that's a problem. That's why we have to ignore that. And our guys in the House, our folks in the states, in the counties where we have DAs, you need to punish these bastards. You need to make it abundantly clear. Oh, okay, you've set a precedent. We've said that. This guy Bragg set a precedent. But it shouldn't just be a precedent for Democrats. If we don't have mutually assured destruction, I hate to tell you this, Glenn, if we don't have mutually assured destruction, then we're destroyed.
Well, I will tell you this. There's no mutually assured destruction. The Republicans are just weak and pathetic, and they're generally pathetic all around the country. Not always. We have several AGs that have stepped up and started to challenge. But I will tell you this. You know, I'm looking at a list of all of the felonies, all of the laws that were broken by Hunter Biden, and it's more than one page. It's several pages long. And there are several states where these laws were broken. It's not just in Delaware and Washington, D.C. and New York. It's also in Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas. And I don't know why people in those states are not taking Hunter Biden to task in the same way, except with actual crimes.
Well, two things. Got to make sure they're state crimes, or they can do what Bragg does, try and figure out how to pull in some federal offense and do it. And don't worry about what the press says. I'll give you another example. I have argued over the decades that you cannot indict a sitting president. It's also the position of the Department of Justice. But if some prosecutor thinks they have a case against Joe Biden, indict him. The issue hasn't been solved or resolved. It hasn't been taken to the Supreme Court yet. This is what the Democrats do. They knew they had no case on the Emoluments Clause, but they did it anyway. Joe Biden knows half the things he does are unconstitutional, goes all the way to the court, and then they have to reverse him. Okay. Well, part of the game is to bog them down and make them play defense. This is the only way that I'm not saying we're going to get our country and our culture back, but it's the only way to begin to push back and make it clear to the Democrat Party that they don't control this country. Because right now, the Democrat Party controls all aspects of the government, whether they win elections or not. They built this Leviathan with the help of Republicans, but it belongs to them. And they are creating some kind of a society in which they empower themselves, which they destroy the courts. They destroy the Senate by packing the Senate. They destroy the Electoral College, so all these people in all these other states don't have a say, just the East and the West Coast. So if we don't get smart, if we don't use the law against them, we're going to drown. It's that simple.
Well, you look back at all the times that we have had, somebody that we could have gone after. We let him pass every single time. We just let it go. And I'm sorry. I know the Supreme Court is yet unsettled on whether you can indict a sitting president. If he's breaking the laws and the Constitution and he is operating, let's say, blowing up a Nord Stream pipeline and doing it without the constitutional protections, I say round them up. They should go to jail.
I agree.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Mark. God bless.
All right, brother.
All right.
God bless you.
You bet. Mark Levin, whose show you can see here on BlazeTV.